Howdy, I'm Michael, and one of the elders. Nice to have you here at our Thanksgiving service. And Pastor Jacob sends his regards in these last few days of 2024 before we launch into 2025. Okay, I'll just set my stopwatch. Okay, so this message, before we go into testimonies, because we want you to be to give your testimony about what God's done for you, maybe this year, maybe it might be the culmination of a few years. But before hearing them, let's have a look at a couple of people who waited patiently. Meet Simeon. Okay, so you can see that we can read that he was a devout and righteous man in the Bible in Jerusalem. And that's a great picture of, that's not actually him, if any of you thought that I took a photo of Simeon. He's back 2,000 years ago, so I don't think they had cameras then. Now, there was a man in Jerusalem whose name was Simeon, and this man was righteous and devout, carefully observing the divine law and looking for the consolation of Israel. That means the encourager of Israel, or the promised one. And the Holy Spirit was on him. It had been revealed to him by the Holy Spirit that he would not die before he had seen the Lord's Christ, or the Messiah, the Anointed One. Prompted by the Spirit, he came into the temple enclosure, and when the parents brought in the child Jesus to do for him the custom required by the law, Simeon took him into his arms and blessed and praised God. So 40 days after the birth, when Jesus was born in the dirty old stable, and there's been wise men visit, and there's been shepherds, and there's been animals in there that we know. And then 40 days, then comes the temple, where they have to give an offering for the child, because in the law it was written that you have to offer a blood sacrifice of some sort. And if you were poor, then you could sacrifice a couple of pigeons or something like that. So the Bible tells us that the Spirit had said to Simeon, you're not going to die until you see the Messiah. So that's his promise. And often, if you think about the promises that God has given us, is we stand on this side, this is the promise, and we go, wow, great word, great message. Might be from the Bible, might be Holy Spirit speaking to us, might be someone's prophetic word to us. This is where the promise is. And over here is the fulfillment. So there's great joy on our faces. We're going, wow, God, you answered prayer. This is where testimonies are heard. But in between, there's this area called waiting, or the process. It's not wasted. This is the time where we get refined. This is a time where all of those things that, think of Joseph, all of those things in us that need to get done before we go to the next step. This is the place where it happens. So imagine the patience, and imagine the faith that it took to hold on to that promise, because he's an old guy by this stage. So day after day, this old guy's in the temple going, I wonder if he's going, is that him? Could that be him? So always in expectation. Then it says that Mary and Joseph, who brought the infant, and when Simeon took Jesus into his arms, this is what he said. Sovereign Lord, so he's going, Sovereign Lord over all, you have promised, you may now dismiss your servant. That means I can now go to meet you in peace. I can die. For my eyes have seen your salvation, which you have prepared in the sight of all nations, a light for revelation to the Gentiles and the glory of your people Israel. This guy's a prophet, because he's not seeing a little baby. He's listening to the Holy Spirit, and he's going, this is your salvation for the whole earth of all time, which you have prepared. And it's a light for revelation to the Gentiles. Guess what? That's us. We get a mention here. And the glory of your people Israel. So Simeon's response was one of complete fulfillment. He says, okay, I can go now. Let me go. I'm prepared to die and go to meet you. His testimony teaches us that God is faithful to his promise, even when the waiting feels long. Simeon's patience was not wasted. Simeon, sorry. It was rewarded in the most profound way. And next, we meet Anna. That's a lovely face, isn't it? Immediately after Simeon's encounter, think of Mary and Joseph. They've had all of these, crazy things happening. Mary's hiding these things in her heart. And then straight after meeting Simeon, okay, maybe we can now get this offering done. Then Anna comes and goes, wow. There was a prophetess, Anna, the daughter of Phanuel of the tribe of Asher. She was very old and had lived with her husband for 7 years after her marriage. And then, as a widow to the age of 84, she did not leave the area of the temple, but was serving and worshipping night and day with fastings and prayers. She too came up at that very moment and began praising and giving thanks to God, and continued to speak of him to all who were looking for the redemption and deliverance of Israel. So she'd spent decades in the temple. She'd gone and maybe made that her home, and she says she never left. And she was worshipping, fasting and praying. She was very old. She'd only been married for 7 years, and then she'd gone and spent the balance of that serving in the temple. Wow. So that was probably over 60 years living and serving in the temple. And despite her personal losses, because she's lost her husband and who knows who else, she devoted herself entirely to God. And when she saw the child Jesus, she immediately recognized him. What is happening here is not a coincidence. Is not someone going, oh, maybe that could be. There's the Holy Spirit prompting and going, this is what happens when you live and fast and pray and just live in the Spirit and listening. And it's like, that's the one. So this is where we can be, as we live in the Spirit, as we listen to him, he's able to direct us, show us. She recognized him as the Messiah, and she gave thanks to God and spoke about the child to all who were looking forward to the redemption of Israel. And Anna's testimony reminds us that no matter how long the wait or how difficult the circumstances, a life that's devoted to God is never wasted. And she lived in hope and saw her faith fulfilled. So those two stories, the stories of Simeon and Anna, they intersect really amazingly, beautifully. They both lived in expectation of the promise. They trusted in God's promises. And their testimony highlights a few points. One, God keeps his promises. Simeon and Anna didn't just hope aimlessly. They trusted in God who never fails. Their lives remind us that God works in his perfect timing, even when it feels that it's delayed to us. And God, you didn't get there. You didn't do it by this critical moment. And we don't see what God sees. Sometimes what we ask for may not be good for us. Number two, teaches us the value of devotion. Anna's life was marked by worship and prayer, and Simeon lived righteously and attentively to the Spirit. Their devotion, it positioned them to hear. It actually moved them into position to be able to hear and to see what God wanted them to. In the same way, our spiritual disciplines draw us closer to God, help us recognize his hand in our lives. And three, hope that's anchored in God. Both Simeon and Anna lived in times of spiritual darkness. There was Roman oppression, there was all sorts of rebellion happening, and yet their hope, with all that's happening, there would have been doom and gloom every day in the news, and yet their hope remained unshaken because it was anchored in God. And today we can have that same unshakable hope, knowing that God is faithful. What is the application of all this for us? Well, be patient in waiting. Waiting is often uncomfortable, but it's during the waiting that God shapes our character and strengthens our faith. Or in another word, he's refining us. There is gold being worked in us. It comes up to the top. We wonder, what is this mess? I'm praying, God, and all I see is the mess of my life. and God's saying, I'm answering your prayer. And he takes all of that junk off, and then we're able to say, God, thank you for that. And to the next point, stay faithful. Like Anna, don't let setbacks or losses or deaths, maybe there've been deaths in your life that, or a great pain in your life of some type. I encourage to keep you as a life of devotion like Anna. Stay steadfast in worship, prayer, and service. She kept going. She could have easily said, "That was my dream. I was going to have a life with my husband and have babies, and I was going to do this." But she kept faithful to go, I'm going to serve God. God, what do you want today? Trust God's timing. Simeon didn't see the Messiah until late in his life, but God's promise was fulfilled exactly as intended. Trust that God's timing is always perfect. And finally, proclaim the good news. Anna immediately shared the news of Jesus. When God fulfills his promises in our lives, we can testify to his goodness and faithfulness. So that's what happens. That's what testimonies are about. That's why when we get you guys to come and give your testimony. Simeon and Anna are beautiful examples of what it looks like to wait on the Lord with hope and faith. Let their testimonies encourage us to remain steadfast in our faith. Whatever promises you're holding on to, trust that God will fulfill them in his perfect way and time. And in Isaiah, it says, but they that wait upon the Lord, shall renew their strength. They shall mount up with wings as eagles. They shall run and not be weary, and they shall walk and not faint. Okay, so as I invite you guys, if you have a testimony, we're looking at around about 2 minutes each testimony, but if we go a little bit over, that's okay. But if I can see that hand, won't be a minute. And when but if you're talking for a really long time, and I can see other people that want to,